On June the 5th, 1944, in the skies over Normandy, planes were being ripped apart, turned into nothing by anti-air. In the middle of that airborne hell, a man was joking around while his C-47 skytrain, riddled with holes, began losing altitude, forcing him and his men into an early jump. This man was Jake McNiece. His face looked like it had been used up by 3 bodies already, as his recruiting officer told him. He was 24 years old, 4 years younger than the cutoff to even join the paratroopers at the time. Paratroopers, men prepared to be sent behind enemy lines, with no assurance of supply, support, or even a functioning chain of command. Aboard the skytrains flying over Normandy, many of these strong, well-trained men were gripped in fear, panic. They knew death could come at any moment. Some, though, were joking around. Men in mohawk haircuts, their faces painted like tribal Native American warriors. They laughed, preparing for the jump that would take them into one of the most brutal fights of World War II. Those men were known as the Filthy 13, troublemakers and savages, the worst of the worst, soon to become famous as one of the best US teams on the field, and an absolute nightmare for their Nazi foes. Jake McNiece was their leader. Born right after the end of World War I and grown during the struggle of the Great Depression, Jake McNiece wasn't set up for an easy life. He lost 2 years of school while his family moved around, following every possible opportunity, and began driving delivery trucks at the age of 12 to contribute to his household. In order to work and support his mother, Jake was ready to drop out of school, but the football coach, Jack Baker, offered him a deal: make the team and he would find Jake a job. The first signs of McNiece's unorthodox leadership style came out during his time on the football field. He wasn't as large as many of his opponents, but he was tough. He led by example. Jake was known to spit tobacco on the ball and tackle the opponent when he was wiping it off. He took every advantage he could in order to win. Still, in high school, McNiece started working for the fire department, shouldering the weight of supporting his family by himself. And while prone to fighting and other types of mischief, he wasn't a bully and often stood up for others. Being drafted to go to war wasn't something McNiece had to be afraid of, since he was completely exempted because of his work as a firefighter. He would later say he was thinking of joining right after Pearl Harbor, but what finally pushed him to arms was the latest trouble he got into. He pummeled a man so badly he felt fighting in Europe would be better than explaining himself to the police. McNiece saw the paratroopers as the perfect fit for his skill set. He was drawn to the idea of operating independently behind enemy lines, fighting the enemy in close quarters, and following only his own instincts. His recruiter must have been impressed by his conviction, since he allowed him to try and join the paratroopers, while being far too young to do so. Paratroopers were, when McNiece joined in 1942, a strategic experiment with many unanswered questions. The US Army used them that same year for the first time, during Operation Torch in North Africa, meaning no one had enough experience to predict what would happen during an operation as massive as the invasion of Normandy. The top brass knew casualties during the jump would be high, and to try and minimize them, the standard of training and physical prowess required to join was incredibly high. Only a few elite trainees out of the recruited pool would become paratroopers, while the remaining men would be sent back to serve in the infantry. McNiece excelled during training and was assigned to the demolition platoon of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, where he brought his particular brand of chaos. Men in training were assigned to tents alphabetically, but fate chose to place Jake with like-minded people. While most other soldiers fought a never-ending battle to maintain cleanliness and decorum, they chose to embrace the muddy, rainy reality of Georgia, earning the nickname the Dirty Five. McNiece and his Dirty Five kept on with their rebellious attitudes, drinking, fighting, and generally disrespecting basic military discipline. And sort of a natural selection began, something the future leader of the Filthy 13 himself noticed at the time. Any rebellious element from other squads was being sent into his, providing him with men he understood and he could control. Tough men who could, if unleashed, prove to be the cream of the crop in terms of fighting. While many saw McNiece as a stain, a useless troublemaker that should have been discharged from the beginning, the superior training officers recognized the value of what he was doing. Quote, "McNiece isn't hurting anything. There will be a time when you'll be awful glad to have McNiece around." In the few cases when military police tried to intervene against McNiece and his guys, things went poorly. He once ended up beating 2 MPs with their own batons, an act he paid with days spent in the stockade, the training camp military prison. On September the 5th, 1943, the 506th Division took to the sea, bound for England. McNiece and his men were finally about to get to focus their aggression on the enemy. Instead of causing mayhem in camp, as McNiece put it, quote, "I would fly first class in a C-47 and jump right in the middle of them. It was more or less individual ability whether I was a success or a failure." As D-Day came closer and the training drills in England kept ramping up, McNiece's demolition platoon finally earned its nickname, the Filthy 13, by using their water ration not to clean themselves, but instead to cook the game they were poaching from the surrounding countryside. McNiece himself came to be known as McNasty. It rapidly became tradition among the Filthy 13 never to salute an officer or call them sir, referring to them instead by various colorful nicknames. Normally, this would have been met with harsh punishment, but their skill was recognized by many, and even those who didn't consider them good soldiers had to face the sheer amount of bodies they left on the ground, both in camp and pubs. A few hours before taking off to Normandy, McNiece was inspired to shave his hair in a mohawk and paint his face like a Native American warrior, in honor of his Choctaw ancestors. In truth, while it was true that his mother was half Choctaw, McNiece already used this blood connection in Georgia to profess himself a gut eater, a nature worshipper, a dangerous savage. Just like he once did on the football field, he was capable of finding any possible advantage, and the look was thought to instill fear in his enemies. His idea spread immediately between his men, who copied him and were immediately spotted by the press swarming the D-Day preparations. A legend was born. When time came to assign missions for the invasion, McNiece was asked directly by his superior, Colonel Sink, to volunteer his unit for a special assignment. While the 506th Parachute Infantry would be tasked with the demolition of all bridges below the Douve Canal, the Filthy 13 would be clearing out a path from Saint-Côme-du-Pont in Carentan, where they would be ordered to defend the bridge. Holding such an important junction would put McNiece right in the crosshairs of a possible German counterattack, and was, as such, one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire operation. He volunteered with no hesitation, asking only for 6 more demolition men, certain he would lose at least half of his guys during the drop. Along with nearly 1,000 C-47, McNiece and his men took to the sky just before 11 p.m. The night turned into a hellscape when they flew over Guernsey Island, where the nearest anti-air batteries were waiting for them. To avoid radar detection, they had to fly below 400 feet, in range of automatic fire, meaning the plane was being riddled with bullet holes. The greatest and deadliest fireworks spectacle ever seen came up to greet them in France, and found McNiece and his Mohawk warriors laughing and joking. The C-47 began to lose altitude, still far from the landing zone, 3 miles from Carrington Bridges, and finally McNiece yelled his order. "Let's get out of here." The first half of the Filthy 13 had already jumped, when in a flash, a large piece of flak shot through the plane and through Piccadilly Willie's reserve parachute. The chute opened immediately, blocking the way, and Willie was forced to gather it by hand in order to let the others jump. A minute was lost, and the two halves of the team would be separated by at least 2 miles. McNiece jumped, followed by Chuck Plauder, just a few seconds before the plane exploded, with Willie still on it. Paratroopers had prepared tricks, strategies to gather after a difficult jump, ways, but the reality of war was different. On that day, not a single man managed to reach McNiece after touching ground. He was alone, behind enemy lines. In a way, he got his wish. Quote, "I was beginning to think they had cancelled the entire invasion, and I was the only American down there. It became a matter of either kill or get killed." McNiece sneaked and fought his way through the French countryside, picking up some of his team and a handful of random paratroopers from other units. The Filthy 13, partially reunited, immediately began delivering their retribution on the Germans. They laid ambushes on the units marching toward the beaches, killing 15, 30 enemies at a time, and disappearing right after. While other paratroopers were regrouping and defending themselves, the Filthy 13 started hunting. Leading 13 men, a mix of original Mohawk warriors and other soldiers found along the way, McNiece finally reached other Allied forces. Colonel Howard Jr. Johnson, commander of the 501st, had fortified himself and his men on the road to the target bridges. Johnson had no intention of moving forward with the plan, choosing instead to regroup and gather all who survived the jump. He sent the Filthy 13 out to work on securing the perimeter, and McNiece obeyed, then just kept walking toward his target. He was not going to abandon his mission for any reason or order. Every bridge left intact or undefended would, after all, mean more and more German reinforcements moving toward the beaches of Normandy. McNiece and his men marched forward and found out the Germans didn't expect anyone to move that deep into enemy territories. The first bridge they reached was almost unguarded, an easy target for their demolition team. From there, they kept going, blowing up every bridge they could against ever-growing resistance. Finally, on daybreak, they mined the main bridge in case they could not hold it and began digging foxholes, preparing for the storm. The counterattack was fierce. Mortars rained death on McNiece's position. A German sniper took out 8 defenders before they reached him. Jack Agnew, one of the original 13, took him out hand to hand by knife. Against all odds, McNiece defended the bridge for 3 days, laying down trap after trap. It was a battle of cunning against might, as the Germans tried to force their way by numbers and superior firepower. It was afternoon, the 3rd day, when McNiece saw 4 P-51 planes in the air. The American Air Force was there to finish the job that the top brass thought the paratroopers had failed. No one thought the mission could have been a success in the midst of the hell that was Normandy at the time. So the order was given: bomb the bridge. Being well fortified, the Filthy 13 survived the blasts that destroyed the bridge, but immediately found themselves fighting an enraged German push, trying to ford the river and finish them off. The fight kept going. On the fifth day holding their ground, McNiece and his men were met by a whole German battalion on the other side of the river, retreating from the beaches. The Filthy 13 was now larger, counting between 30 and 40 troopers, as more and more stranded soldiers joined their efforts. With hundreds of men at his disposal, the German commander asked for surrender. The answer was swift. Quote, "What in the hell do you mean, us surrender? You've got to surrender to us." Enraged, the Germans attacked. Just like in his football days, McNiece took advantage of his enemy's weakness. The Germans charged in with confidence, and the Filthy 13 laid in wait, opening fire only when the first enemies already forded the river, creating a stretched-out line of men. A killing field. Hundreds were cut down in mere seconds, and those who survived the first salvo and reached the shore met face-painted warriors lying in wait. No mercy was given, and when the fighting ended, the Filthy 13 walked the field, shooting wounded Germans in the head to stop more merciful allies from wasting morphine on them. McNiece called it combing the field. The Filthy 13 kept on going, fighting the entire campaign and delivering mayhem on the German forces again and again. McNiece jumped 4 times in total, a feat few other paratroopers could manage. He led his men dropping into the disaster that was Operation Market Garden. He jumped into Bastogne right before the Battle of the Bulge, and finally near Prüm in Germany. While his undisciplined antics barred him from promotion, as he ended the war as First Sergeant, Jake McNiece was awarded 4 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and was inducted into the French Order of the Legion of Honor. Even today, his instinctual approach to modern combat and leadership is studied and analyzed, and the Filthy 13 have become legends, to be remembered in awe just like the ancient berserkers.